What I'm offering here is a 10-step guide to getting your LLC open. Now, I'm a psychologist and specifically a forensic psychologist, but I think these suggestions would probably hold for any professional service. The reason you want an LLC versus being a sole proprietor is because an LLC establishes something called the corporate veil. And if you follow these steps that I'm about to lay out for you, it puts a layer of protection between your business and your personal assets so that if someone sues your company, they can bankrupt you professionally but not personally. All right, so I often have to start with a disclaimer, but in this case, it's super important to say that I'm not in any way offering legal or tax or consulting advice. I'm truly just putting this out there as a general set of recommendations and guidance that I wish had been out there when I started my practice so that I could have made some decisions about how and when to do things. But I'm not an expert, and if you want an expert, hire someone and pay them. And as another disclaimer, it kind of depends a little bit on where you are. So like, for example, my colleagues in California, you can't take advantage of these same liability protections of an LLC. And I imagine there's other jurisdictions that are similar. And then taking even a further step back, if you're still trying to decide if an LLC is right for you, there's another video about that, and I can link to that in the description below. But assuming that you're here to talk about and learn about how to set up an LLC, now it's going to be a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm going to recommend that your first few steps actually have nothing to do with filing any business paperwork. So step one, in my opinion, is to decide on a system for financial tracking. This is really important at the outset because I think you'll find with a startup that there's this loop that you can't get out of right away. Like while you're trying to separate your personal and your business finances, because you can't make money in your business until you get through these first 10 steps I'm laying out here. And you can't get through the 10 steps without money. So set aside somewhere between $200 to $2,000 for startup costs here. That number depends very much on where you are and what you're trying to do. And it has nothing to do with other things like rent and if you need equipment like, test materials. It doesn't involve trademarking. We'll talk about that in a second. But really, I'm just talking strictly about the cost of these next 10 steps. So the money, that $200 to $2,000 is going to be called an owner investor drawing. And in most cases, in most places, you're going to get a lot more than that as a write-off for startup costs in the first year of your business. And that's the first calendar year as far as taxes are concerned. So you may not want to open in December. At least that's how I understand it. So ask your accountant or your tax advisor if that's your situation, and maybe wait a month. In general, if you're planning to just be in solo practice and if your income stream is going to be relatively simple. So let's say, for example, you exclusively do therapy or you exclusively do assessment or something like that, right? If that's your situation, then you can be fine keeping it simple with something just like a spreadsheet where you track the date, the amount, the expense type or category, and the income. Now, if you think you'll do something more complicated, like a group practice or multiple different streams of revenue, or if you're just more comfortable with software or you already use like tracking or financial software personally or in other businesses, then you can certainly use something like QuickBooks or Quicken. I personally use Wave Apps. It's I'll leave a link in the comments. I like it because it's totally free to use. It has invoicing capabilities, and there's a little bit of a learning curve, but not nearly as steep as some of the other programs. And then at the end of the year, I can just print reports easily that I give to my accountant or my tax advisor. So that's step one. Step two, get a phone number. You will need a phone number on everything you file. And this is a nice, easy one for you to tackle and get some momentum going. Now, I actually really fought this step because I hate the phone and I wanted to do most of my communicating through email and through automated forms and things like that if possible. But you gotta have a phone number. I'll explain why in a second. But in terms of what I ended up going with, I used OpenPhone. Again, I'll link in the description, but The reason I picked Open Phone was because at that time I was looking for the cheapest option. Like I said, when I first opened, my goal was to try to use the phone as little as possible. I've probably learned that that's difficult in practice, but in any case, I was looking for the cheapest option I could find that also still allowed texting. And so at the time of this recording, it's $13 a month for that phone line, and it's app based. So I use my regular cell phone, and it's really easy to switch back and forth between the two, my personal number and my business number. I will say in hindsight that I maybe should have looked for something that had a phone and fax integrated, because I ended up having to add that later. And you'll notice a fax is not in one of these 10 steps. It's not essential to getting your LLC open, but I have found that it's fairly essential to trying to get records into my practice. And as much as I dislike the fax machine and find it to be a very antiquated device, I've come to understand that it's a necessary evil. So in any case, having a separate phone line and a separate fax for me has not been the end of the world. It's worked just fine. And I've personally prioritized the cheapest possible options there because I tend to rely on them less than other technology that I use in my practice. Okay, step 3 is to get a P.O. box or some kind of mailing address. And again, I hate the mail. I mean, I really hate the mail. But you're going to have all the same problems without a mailing address that you had without a phone number. You can get a P.O. box relatively cheaply, and most places will still, like these days with P.O. boxes, most of them will allow you to still have like what they consider a private mailing address where you can actually receive most of your mail. So you don't have to write that it's a P.O. box, basically. And so for anything public facing, like for example, when registering your business with the state, anything that I have to register for, this is the public address that I use. Okay, step 4 is to get an email address. Now, for me, this was much more in my wheelhouse and much more comfortable and something that I knew that I wanted and needed. And for me, the main problem here was that I knew that I didn't have a website yet when I first opened. And I knew that when I got a website, this email address would probably change. But for me, that was a minor problem. I essentially just have opted to have the old one forward into the new one. So I haven't had to change anything anywhere on anything. And so I'm going to just stop for a second and say something about your business name here, because that is likely to influence what email address you use. And so as part of choosing your business name, you're going to want to be a little intentional in thinking through your aspirations and your possibilities. So a lot of folks who know that all they want is to stay in solo practice, they just use their name, and that works totally fine, with the added benefit that it's unlikely to already be taken unless you have a really common name. But if you think that you might ever expand to group practice or to other things like trying to become a training site or something like that, then I think you're probably going to want a name that can grow with you. So when I started looking for a name and I knew I wanted a name that could grow with me, I was amazed at how many dozens of things that I came up with that are already being used somewhere for psychology. So some things that I thought were really obscure were already taken. And there's an important distinction here to get out of the way, which is that two businesses doing the exact same thing with the exact same name can operate in two separate states so long as neither of them files a trademark. But I'm a risk-averse individual, and I just didn't want to risk that. And I wasn't willing to just like take the name out from someone else who happened to get to it first. But, just because they didn't know they needed to trademark it, I wasn't willing to like swoop in and steal something that I was able to verify was being used somewhere else. And so I went through a very arduous process of going through every name that I could think of, from like Apex to Zenith. And I tried things like the neighborhood where I grew up and a sort of obscure landmark that I have a particular fascination with. There were psychology practices with all of those names. And so I finally settled on what I think is the perfect name. I really love it. I think it fits the practice perfectly. And I did elect to go through the trademark process, which, again, is not on this 10-step list because it's not strictly necessary to get your doors open. But if you're interested in hearing more about trademarking in another video, let me know in the comments. But if you're feeling solid about your name and nothing comes up when you search for it between like Google, and I recommend you do a trademark search if you know how, then you can feel confident getting your email address set up using that name somehow. I started out with a Gmail address and I used that for a long time before my website was ready. And then ultimately, if for some reason you get to the next step of picking a name and you realize the name you chose isn't viable, it's not that big of a deal. You can just go ahead and pick another email address since you haven't actually done anything with it yet. Okay, we're at step 5 and the fun begins. You're ready to be official. Way to go. So this step is where you register your business with the Secretary of State. And I can't possibly walk you through the requirements in every state, but here in Minnesota, what you do is you search for something like, register my LLC, and then you'd want to just make sure that you end up at the Secretary of State site and not some third-party place where they'll take your money to do something you can do yourself. So you generally have to create an account using that fancy new email address, and then go ahead and follow the steps they take you through to pay the registration fee and apply. Now, step 6 is to create and sign your LLC forms. And really this is sort of a false separation here because this is done in tandem with step 5. Like, for example, in Minnesota, part of your filing is to complete one of the forms I'm about to outline here. So this will vary, but ultimately for an LLC, most of the time you're going to end up with 3 documents. And those, and you acting consistently with them, is what forms your corporate veil, like we talked about earlier. So the first form that you need is called an operating agreement. You can find blank templates for this on the internet. Just search operating agreement template. This outlines the rules for your LLC members. That's you. You're the member. The structure of your organization, which is the organization's also you, and the ownership percentages, still you, 100% you. Now, this paperwork is really something that makes more sense for partnerships or for more than a one-person LLC, because the chances that you're going to get into a dispute with yourself are slim, at least I hope. But you need to have it. So I picked up some tips on YouTube from actual lawyers about subtle language changes that I did incorporate into my documents. And for me, that was worth the small time investment of listening to a couple of short videos about it. But really, unless you're planning on suing yourself one day, I can't imagine this matters that much. I'm sure there's an attorney out there or many attorneys out there who will take issue with me saying that. Now, the second form you need to fill out is called your Articles of Incorporation. That's basically just your name, your contact info, the number of people and general category of your LLC, if you're full or part-time, and your gross revenue or expected gross revenue. And then after you fill out your application with the state and pay your money, they will typically issue you a certificate of organization. And then it's those 3 documents, the operating agreement, the Articles of Incorporation, and the certificate of organization. Those make you an official business, and they protect your personal assets from business liability as long as you follow the structure and rules you laid out there and aren't in California or some similar state. Okay, step 7, and then you're well on your way to done here. You're going to file with the IRS. See how official you are? You're going to get a federal tax ID number. It's a fast process. Most of the time you get issued a letter immediately with your number. And you're going to need your social security number for that, so just be prepared. Step 8 is to apply with your state to get a state tax ID number. Now, in Minnesota, you need to create an account to do that as well. And then this is the account where you'll pay certain state taxes for your business. But ultimately, it might be different in different places. So Google your state's name and tax ID number or something along those lines, and you should be able to hopefully figure it all out. Step 9 is to open a business checking account. Now, You need most of the info from steps 2 to 8 to do this. And if you use a bank where your personal assets are, then you can often avoid low monthly balance fees, because especially to start out with, they're going to be low monthly balances in there. So make sure it's a business checking account and not a personal one. I was able to open mine online, which was really nice. And then while I was at it, I also opted to open a business credit card, and I picked one that had no interest for 20 months. And that really helped me feel a lot better about some of those startup costs, because I wasn't penalized for taking a few months to get money coming into the business before clearing those balances. And then your last step, and again, this is absent trademarking. That's an additional step if you go that route, which you're going to be doing at this time too. But the last step is to check with your board to see if you need to register your business with them as well. So for example, here in Minnesota, professional firms for psychologists are required to file an initial registration with our licensing board, and then also renew that registration fee annually. Now, I doubt every board or even maybe most boards require this. I actually have no idea. But you're just going to want to make sure that you're not doing anything to upset the nice folks who hold your license to practice. And that's it. 10 steps and you're a real independent entity. Good luck. If you need any more tips, encouragement, or support, feel free to reach out in the comments below. This is Streamline Forensics, and we train forward.